Hey everyone, my name is Mike, and with Legion about a week away, I want to talk about my thoughts on Warlords of Draenor and my thoughts about Legion. So this is kind of like a review of Warlords, what I thought about certain things, and just sharing some of the memories I have in this expansion. I'm also going to share my thoughts and concerns about Legion. I anticipate this being a longer video, and the footage in this video is stuff I didn't end up using throughout Warlords of Draenor, whether I was just too lazy or couldn't find a relevant video to put it in. So Warlords of Draenor had every right to be the best expansion ever. The hype was insane, and I've never been as hyped as I was for a game as I was for Warlords. I was so excited that I resubscribed out of excitement with 2 months left of Mists of Pandaria, even though I had nothing to do. The whole idea of going back to Outland, the Burning Crusade expansion, seeing the zones before they got destroyed, it was so cool. The content they were promoting sounded awesome. They claimed to have the biggest team working on this. I was someone who not only believed wholeheartedly, but preached to anyone that would listen that Warlords is going to be the revitalization of WoW. I was calling it being one of, if not the best expansion. I was 100% sure that WoW was going to reestablish itself as the game you need to be playing. So the expansion releases to one of, if not the worst Blizzard launch of all time. The servers were unstable for weeks afterwards. Instance servers in game were unstable for probably even longer. I mean, the garrison quest to start leveling in Warlords, it was bottlenecked for an entire server for over an hour before it got fixed. There was plenty of beta time to clue in that this was not going to be a good idea. Despite the launch, it was one of the biggest launches to date, and for the first bit, the game was actually amazing. Everyone loved it and it was incredible. The leveling was enjoyable and paced nicely. The addition of bonus objectives and treasures was great. Player housing was finally introduced after nearly 10 years of asking for it, and I've said it before, but I absolutely loved the chaos that was launch week. But it didn't take too long for the opinions to drastically change about this expansion. It quickly became evident that there was nothing to do and there was a lot of things cut. I remember wanting to like it and trying to convince myself that I did, and there was a time when one of my friends messaged me on Facebook and he's an ex-WoW player from the Lich King expansion. He asked me if the expansion was any good, and I said, yeah, totally, it's great. But I remember after hitting send, I felt like I was lying and I didn't truly believe what I was saying. And sure enough, over time, the game became just AFK Simulator 2015. I got onto raid and I did my missions and then I got off. Speaking of raiding, the raiding was absolutely great, I thought. I may be a little bit biased as this was the first expansion I've raided regularly since Cataclysm. And when I was raiding with my brother and all of my friends that I've known since high school. High Maul is a great raid, specifically the Imp Raider fight. Progression on that fight, the multitasking, and the skill you need from everyone was something I absolutely love about raiding. I think Margok is one of my favorite bosses ever. There's no boss in High Maul that I actually dread fighting due to just boredom of the fight. I loved the way it looked, I loved everything about it, and it's probably my favorite raid, to be honest. And I think one of the reasons I like it so much is because it wasn't relevant long enough for me to actually grow to hate it. So enter Blackrock Foundry, which I also thought was good. It wasn't as great as High Maul, but it was still enjoyable. It was out for about twice as long as High Maul, which apparently was enough to make me not enjoy it as much, but not hate it. Luckily though, when Heroic started to become a little bit dull, I got into Mythic, and Mythic BRF was my first taste of hard bosses, and I loved it. Wiping on Beastlord was a pain in the ass, but I actually enjoyed that fight. Even simple fights like Gruul or Orgorger were enjoyable. Even stupid fights like Hans and Franz, which we had over 100 wipes on, I never actually hated because of the fight, I just hated wiping to the fight. And then we get Hellfire Citadel, which was pretty cool at the start. The longevity of the raid definitely took the enjoyment out of it and made me hate it a lot more than I would have if it had just been shorter. Every fight got more and more dreadful as I did it each week. At first they were decent and interesting fights, but doing them as much as I did just sucked. And to be honest, I don't know if I'll be able to step into Hellfire Citadel for a long time after this expansion's over. And actually just recently I realized that one of the reasons I'm looking forward to Legion is because I can stop doing Hellfire Citadel. And it's funny because this raid is the exact opposite of High Maul. I enjoyed every boss there and I hate every single boss in Hellfire Citadel. So as I talked about earlier, I got to raid with my brother and my close friends at the start of this expansion. If you've ever done that, you know how fun that is. I have some really great memories from those days, like when our tank Benji sold his weapon to a merchant and then had to tank Imp Raider with Thunder Fury. Or when Benji was out for the night so his brother raided for him and spent all of his DKP on some DPS ring he didn't actually need. Or when Benji would AFK in the middle of a raid and go take a shit. Or just something simple like when we killed Margok as a guild. We had a lot of random, crude, and sometimes just blatantly offensive conversations during raid times, but it was some of the most fun I've ever had, and it's too bad that it only lasted for a couple of months due to real life time constraints. But I did find another guild, one that I've grown to love for its skill level and sense of humor. I've had just as many, if not more, good times with this guild than I did playing with friends. But nothing ever comes close to that feeling of shit talking on Mumble when you've known these people since high school. When it comes to content outside of raiding, there wasn't much of it. You could farm reps, but that's all it was, just one giant farm. Not to whine or sound entitled, but having all the reps be grind reps was just stupid. It's not very fun to grind one reputation, but to do it for 3 or 4 other ones? No thanks. and the rewards weren't even worth it either. There was no incentive to do these grinds. You can get a boar mount from this rep, or that rare spawn, or this rare drop. Collect all the boars. It's just boring and uninspired, pun intended. I even found myself wishing that there was dailies that I could do. Pandaria had a ton of dailies, and WoD probably had and still only has so few dailies that I could count them on my hands and toes. The garrisons were cool at first, but quickly lost their appeal both aesthetically and in terms of content. I don't know if you Alliance ever got bored of your awesome looking garrison, but as Horde it was just so plain and boring. The missions may have been a great source of gold, but I just felt like an NPC doing my missions. My followers come to me for a quest, I give it to them, they go play the game for me, and then they come back and hand in their quests. I've never really cared about player housing, but I know this is nowhere near what people had in mind when they started advocating for this in Burning Crusade. I'll touch briefly on PvP since I'm not that big on it and only did pre-made Ashrans to get all my Gladiator Sanctum achievements. So I understand that there is a ton of BGs and you don't want to spread out all of your PvPers across these different BGs, but not even having a single new arena map was a bad idea. For my own personal experience, I didn't actually mind Ashran too much. I know that it's pretty much hated amongst the PvP community though. The only reason I didn't mind Ashran was because I did 99% of all my games in a pre-made that was on vent. And when Ashran was announced, it sounded really epic. Like they were announcing it prior to WoD's launch, and it turned out to be a half-decent PvE/PvP zone with a heavy emphasis on PvE. But what really upset me here was when they started implementing pre-made countermeasures, such as giving you a 10-minute debuff for entering the zone but not accepting the queue. It just baffled me that Blizzard would try to put a stop to one of the very few things that promoted leaving your garrison, interacting with others, and playing as a community in an MMO. But the single most infuriating thing that happened during Warlords of Draenor didn't come from the inconsistency. The inconsistency in whether flying would be available or not, whether we would see Netherstorm, how big the WoD team truly was. The most infuriating thing came from patch 6.1. Major patch 6.1, content patch 6.1. One of only 2 content patches in Warlords of Draenor compared to 4 in Pandaria, 3 in Cataclysm, 2 in Lich King, and 4 in Burning Crusade. Where almost every other content patch in the history of this game has introduced a new raid, a dungeon, which by the way we saw no new ones after the launch, or Battleground, again we saw no new ones in Warlords. Patch 6.1 famously brought us Twitter integration. There was some quality of life improvements which were much appreciated, but patch 6.1 was the Twitter patch. Oh, and don't forget everyone's favorite, the selfie camera. Like, are you kidding me? In a time where your subscription numbers are drastically decreasing, the overall opinion of the franchise is at an all-time low, lower than the LOL Pandas time, your solution, your resolve, is allowing us to tweet an achievement we earned or take a selfie in the game. This patch pissed me off more than it probably should have, but it was the patch that solidified my current beliefs on Blizzard and WoW, which is that WoW is yesterday's news. Blizzard has much more successful franchises and no longer needs to rely on WoW, and therefore will squeeze whatever life it has left in it for as many pennies as it can. Legion looks and sounds promising, it does, but only time will tell whether I'm wrong or right about my assessment of Blizzard and their opinion on WoW. And I really hope I'm wrong. I started this video by talking about how I thought WoD was going to revitalize WoW. And it's funny because in hindsight, the expansion did the exact opposite of that. It put a sour taste in everyone's mouth, made veterans, new players, and anyone in between leave permanently. It's the Saint Anger in the discography of expansions. An unusual change of pace, distancing itself from what made it great that was filled with small amounts of greatness that are completely overshadowed by all of the former. This kind of expansion would maybe be okay for a startup company with a smaller community and an MMO, but for a AAA company such as Blizzard, for probably one of the most famous video games of all time, and for the 5th expansion since the game's inception, this is just laughable. A full-priced, half-assed game that provided us with historically the least amount of content, but somehow managed to drag on for just under 2 years. If Blizzard hasn't learned by now, I kinda get the feeling that they never will. So let's talk about Legion. Unfortunately, due to WoD, I'm not too excited for Legion. I didn't really feel anything when it was announced, when features were being announced, nor when the release date was announced. But as August 30th gets a little bit closer, I find myself getting a little bit giddy, but it's only because of the expansion launch, which I find are always fun. I'm excited for launch week, the rush to 110, the entire server doing this new content, doing dungeons, gearing up. I'm excited that I get to make a ton of videos again. Like, I love researching this stuff and posting videos, and at the start of the expansion, there's just so much stuff for me to do. I leveled through all the zones in the beta a few times, and it wasn't as exciting for me personally as Warlords was for some reason. I think the world quests are going to be a great way to get people out in the world. They just feel like daily quests, which I don't have an issue with. I think a lot of people will end up hating them though, and others won't, kind of just like dailies are now. A small concern I have is that the world quests will be mandatory for getting artifact power, but for me personally, I think that if they're not super grindy quests every single time, I won't mind it too much. The dungeons from what I've seen look pretty cool. There's a few that I anticipate I'm gonna hate very quickly. I think the whole Mythic Plus difficulty has some huge potential to not only be very fun, but also a great way to have some sort of content and also make old content relevant once patches start releasing. The raids from what I've seen look okay. None of the fights really excite me so far from the videos I've watched. The scenery in at least Emerald Dream I think sucks. I'm not looking forward to having to fight in that raid as it's all foggy, red, and it just looks lame to me. I'm very impressed with the fact that there are 11 world bosses to start the expansion. That provides a ton of variety and expands on the amount of things that you can do. Artifacts are a cool premise, and I appreciate all the work that had to go into making the different designs. The talent tree is an interesting way to offer progression for everyone, which makes them feel more powerful, so good job there. And I think a lot of these designs are really cool. For the first time ever, I find myself wanting to level my alts just so I can get that one really sweet looking artifact design. But just as a quick aside, I think the warrior artifacts are the worst ones in this expansion. They're just bland, they're not cool at all. And I'm really disappointed at the fact that I know that as soon as I get my artifact and when I get to a transmogrifier, that is the first thing I'm going to get rid of, is that ugly looking two-handed sword. Arms one looks garbage, and so does the prot one. I don't like any of them. But where the artifact left me disappointed, the class hall has not. I haven't seen them all, but as a warrior, my class hall is badass. I haven't looked too much into what the halls are, but from what I've heard, they're supposed to be like a garrison light. You can do some things there, and it's where you'll spend some of your time, but it's mainly just a pit stop. There's supposedly less missions, and the missions actually unlock things for you to do in the game, which, if that's true, could be really fun, provided the unlocked missions aren't just one and done types of things. One thing I really appreciate about the class halls is that there are different ones for every class, just like the artifact. Everything has a distinct look and feel to something relevant to the class, and I think they have a specific feature too, like the gladiator sanctum in the warrior hall, which again also I think is just badass. Demon Hunters are pretty sweet. From what I've played so far, they're really fun and really mobile. The little bit I know about their story is pretty cool, especially since Illidan is one of my favorite characters in the game. My hope for Legion is that it ends up being a great expansion, and I think that for a lot of people it has to be. As I said before, Warlords left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. Unfortunately, some of those people are gone for good. For other players, Legion may be the final straw, and what happens to that camel's back is entirely up to Blizzard. I think if this expansion ends up being anything short of pretty good, WoW will permanently be on the decline. Legion has very big shoes to fill. Many people are starting out or returning to the game due to the Warcraft movie, and I still think that had the movie and Legion released closer together, the hype for both of them would have been much bigger, because anyone who wanted to play WoW after seeing Warcraft were dropped into the tail end of a dead expansion. Legion has the unfortunate duty of being the response to the question, how does Blizzard follow Warlords, and what did they learn from it? If Blizzard has learned how to pace themselves and be 3 steps ahead, this expansion has potential. I think if Legion is here to stay for a while and they have planned for that, with a bunch of content, this expansion can succeed where WoD failed. And I think if Blizzard better communicates changes, better addresses the community's issues, and is open to good feedback, this expansion can meet players' expectations. We've heard for a while that patch 7.1 will be releasing on the PTR shortly after Legion launches, and just last week we got a trailer for the patch, so that makes me hopeful. So here's what I want from Legion. I want raids to be paced well. I don't want to spend 2 months in one raid, 4 in the next, and over a year in the next one. I want to spend like 4 to 6 months per raid, and I want there to be at least 4 of them. I want content patches to be content patches. If there's no content, don't call it a content patch. I want Legion to be the current expansion for a couple of years, and I want there to be a steady flow of content in those couple years. And I really want the final raid to last at most 9 months. I'll accept a year, but only if we're given something else to do in the meantime. Honestly, what I want the most for Legion is to be what I thought Warlords was gonna be and should have been. I want Legion to reignite the WoW name and restore some sort of glory to the game. I want people, myself included, to enjoy the game and talk about it positively. Jesus, I just want to be excited about logging on when Legion's been out for a year. I'm someone who's gonna play WoW through thick and thin. Clearly, I played WoD for all 2 years of it. But I like playing WoW more when it's fun and there's more things to do than just raid and AFK. At the end of Legion, I want to make this kind of video, but talk about how I wasn't hyped at all for this and it blew me out of the water. I want to talk about how great the expansion was and how I'm looking forward to 8.0 but will miss Legion. And I think that we all want that out of Legion, and I just hope that Blizzard can provide us with that experience. So in summary, I thought Warlords of Draenor was disappointing. It was a horrible expansion, and I'm so glad that it's finally over. Legion has potential, but whether or not it reaches that potential remains to be seen. So those are my thoughts and kind of a review of what I thought of Warlords and what I think of Legion so far. Feel free to voice your opinion in the comments, whether you agree or disagree with me, or you just want to add something to what I was saying. My name is Mike. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I will see you all in Legion.